the White House is saying, oh no, well, we're trying to get restraint. But the reality is everything that Netanyahu wants is given to him. Money, the bombs. You don't see any real pushback except something from the Pentagon. That's true. You see something from the Pentagon from there. But is it enough to stop this embedded? I mean, these are deep-seated policy initiatives in the United States. These are what I call these, these are the structural, deep structural layers of foreign policy has always been the support for Israel and the aim to control the Middle East. And if they can get at Iran, of course, they crush China, because then China loses its own source of fuel and oil. It's heavily dependent on Iran. It would be a major blow to China strategically, and of course would weaken Russia, which depends on Iran for the whole of the, if you like, Central Asia corridor, because Iran has that experience. Russia has a certain drawback there. So it all makes sense, and that's why we see, this confluence of interest. But for presentational purposes, of course, we're trying to dissuade Israel from going ahead. But America's interest has been, for 50 years, this project in the Middle East to bring it under the US government control. This is a neocon project. It doesn't belong to this or that, but it combines, if you like, parts of all the parties.
Alastair Crooke challenges us to look beyond official statements coming out of Washington. The White House claims to urge restraint, but Crooke suggests that the reality is very different. For decades, the U.S. has maintained a deep and often hidden alliance with Israel, supporting its defense and ambitions almost without question. This isn't just diplomacy or friendship. It's what Crooke describes as a deeply embedded policy, one that is the result of over half a century of calculated strategy. At the heart of this policy is a belief in Israel as a regional cornerstone for American influence. And, despite outward appearances, Crooke argues that America's calls for restraint are more about public relations than genuine intervention. In Washington's strategy room, Israel is an essential ally, one who keeps the region in check and secures America's foothold in the Middle East. In the 1970s, American foreign policy in the Middle East was undergoing a seismic shift. The U.S. saw Israel as more than a state to support. It was a strategic stronghold. The key to this relationship was ensuring Israel's dominance in the region, acting as a counterbalance to hostile neighbors, particularly Iran and Iraq. Alastair Crooke describes this as the foundation of a 50-year project, a series of initiatives aimed at solidifying U.S. control over the Middle East. Crooke argues that this isn't just a Republican or Democratic endeavor. It's bipartisan, transcending any single administration. This neocon project reflects a deep-seated conviction that the Middle East must remain under U.S. influence, and Israel is the linchpin for making that happen. As Crooke notes, Netanyahu's requests to Washington for resources, from missiles to monetary aid, are rarely met with resistance. This goes beyond defense. It's about shaping the entire geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The deep-seated U.S. support for Israel comes with a shared goal: limiting Iran's power. For both nations, Iran represents a threat not because it challenges Israel directly, but because it disrupts the established power structure in the region. Iran's influence in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon destabilizes what the U.S. and Israel aim to preserve, a Middle East that, one way or another, remains within their sphere of influence. But why target Iran specifically? According to Crooke, it's because Iran provides resources and influence to two key American rivals, China and Russia. China relies on Iran as a critical supplier of oil, which makes Iran strategically essential to Beijing's plans for expanding influence across Asia. If the U.S. could weaken Iran, China would be forced to adjust its entire strategy, losing a vital energy partner. For Russia, Iran represents a critical ally in securing its influence across Central Asia. Crooke highlights that Russia's involvement with Iran goes beyond simple diplomacy. It's about ensuring that Russia retains influence in a region dominated by Islamic states. Russia needs Iran as a stable partner to maintain security along its southern borders and to exert influence across the Central Asia corridor. By isolating Iran, the U.S. can effectively tighten the pressure on Russia, further destabilizing its interests in Central Asia. This isn't just a minor geopolitical move, it's a strategic assault on Russia's regional influence. Crooke believes that U.S. leaders understand this and are leveraging every diplomatic and military avenue to undermine the Russia-Iran partnership. For the U.S., isolating Iran isn't only about controlling one country. It's about boxing in Russia and cutting China off from a crucial ally. This broader strategy, Crooke argues, has made Iran an essential target in the eyes of American policymakers. Crooke suggests that there's a critical difference between what the U.S. says and what it does. While the White House may release statements urging Israel to exercise caution, it's largely a diplomatic act designed for the global stage. This messaging is meant to present the U.S. as a peacekeeper, a nation that values stability in the region. But behind closed doors, the support for Israel remains unshakable. Washington's diplomatic words are more about maintaining its image as a global mediator than enacting any real restraint on Israel. This dual messaging, speaking one way to the public and acting differently in policy, is key to understanding the U.S. strategy. America wants the world to see it as a force for peace, even as it quietly enables Israel to pursue its objectives. Crooke calls this a presentational tactic, a way for the U.S. to navigate the complex realities of foreign policy without compromising its larger ambitions in the Middle East. Looking forward, Crooke raises questions about where U.S. policy in the Middle East is heading. If, as he suggests, the U.S. remains committed to supporting Israel unconditionally, what does this mean for the broader power structure in the region? As Iran continues to assert itself, the U.S. might double down on efforts to isolate and weaken Tehran. But this could lead to greater tensions with China and Russia, who both rely on Iran as a strategic partner. For the U.S., maintaining influence in the Middle East is about far more than protecting Israel. It's about controlling the balance of power, cutting off resources to rivals, and ensuring that no other power, whether regional or global, can challenge American supremacy. Crooke's insights suggest that this project is deeply embedded, unlikely to change, and very much at the core of America's Middle Eastern agenda. According to Alastair Crooke, the White House is saying, "Oh no, we're trying to encourage restraint," but in reality, everything Netanyahu wants is given to him. Money, bombs. You don't see any real pushback except a bit from the Pentagon. And while there is some resistance from the Pentagon, it isn't enough to stop this entrenched policy direction. These are deeply rooted policy initiatives in the United States, what I'd call the structural layers of foreign policy. Support for Israel and the aim to control the Middle East have always been at the core. If the U.S. can gain control over Iran, it would weaken China significantly, as China is heavily dependent on Iran for oil. Such a blow would be strategically damaging to China. Additionally, this would undermine Russia, which relies on Iran for access to the Central Asia corridor, an area where Iran has extensive experience and Russia faces certain limitations. It all aligns with U.S. interests, which is why we see this confluence of aims. Publicly, we may be trying to dissuade Israel from certain actions, but America's interest in controlling the Middle East has been a 50-year project. This is a neoconservative agenda, one that doesn't belong to any single administration but rather incorporates elements from across political factions. Thanks for watching.